in 3.0 we released the Mobiglas, just kind of like our first iteration into kind of the new UI that we had envisioned for it. It was an improved version, but it still had a lot of issues in terms of the usability, basically how it fit in the world, and how it had some kind of issues with your mouse cursor. When you breathe, you would run into these issues where your mouse would be on the button at one point and then be off and then be on again just because of the breathing. So we took a look at some solutions to fix that, and what we have now is a much more intuitive and usable interface because of the new way we actually attach it. So we actually, right now, attach the Mobiglas via an IK solution. So what we do is we specify where an IK target point is relative to the player's camera. So once we have that point, then we can just procedurally animate the arm up, and we'll have some offsets that we can actually tweak to really kind of, because it's basically very, very pixel per pixel, pixel perfect. We want to be pixel perfect with the stuff, and have it be just the right size. Like if it's just slightly too big, then we'll really want to adjust that. So now we've got the actual control to specify these offsets for the Mobiglas, and it really allowed us to really dial in the scale and the positioning that we wanted on screen to facilitate an optimal user experience. So the other benefit that came with that is now in all these different contexts, whether it's an EVA or whether it's on foot or you're crouching or you're in these various different ships, actually now that we have a single target point that's relative to the player's camera, the UI is now in a much more consistent place. So the positioning and the scale is much more consistent now in all of the different contexts, because before what had happened is that you'd have specific poses that animators had to hand animate. And when the animators are animating this, it's very hard for them to actually see their positioning is going to actually end up in the engine. So they think it's Maya. I'm not actually sure what they work in, but when they try to integrate in the engine, it's usually like at a different place. So they kind of have to approximate it. And so before, all the Mobiglas poses in the different contexts were all approximated. So you ended up with maybe in crouch, like part of it was cut off or angled a little bit more. So now we can actually have a much more control and fine-tuning of that sort of stuff. So it's been really great, and it really helps, in addition to all the other changes that we made in terms of utilizing more of the screw-in real estate as well. One thing that we did in looking at the current 3.0 vehicle manager and player manager was the kind of awkward menu. So we basically have an accordion menu system whereupon you have to drop down lists, and then when you click on something, that then transitions to a whole different window. And if you wanted to change another port or something, view items in another port, you have to go back and then drop down another menu and then select that. So it was kind of a lot of user clicks in order to actually get to where you actually wanted to go.
We had the list on the side, this concertina list with the 3D model that you could see where, like, rotated around, see where things were. That concertina didn't really work for us. There was too many items in there. It kept collapsing, so we needed to fix that anyway because it just wasn't as usable. But really, we weren't using a lot of the screen space, and I think that was a problem that we saw very early on with the Mobi in general. That was like, this is really cool thing. At any point, you can open it up and see what you've got, but there's a lot of screen going wasted. So from a readability standpoint, because it was a lot smaller on screen, we really wanted to bring that out. So making it bigger, filling the screen was a big thing. And then once we had that extra screen space, we didn't need to keep collapsing things down. That was really, it was a space-saving choice. So by putting two separate columns on the left, you could pick your hard point, you could pick what you put on it, and it's still got plenty of screen space to see your character model, see the details on the side. So by bringing the view in, all of a sudden it opened a lot of doors from a usability standpoint.
So another great benefit that actually just simply fell out of this approach that we're taking is that now we've solved the flickering cursor issue. Now that the UI is much more full screen and it's much more straight on to your camera, so it's much more usable. However, one of the things that we're concerned about with that is how much more static the UI was going to seem with that approach. And we thought we might have needed to stop the actual breathing, so you'd just be like a statue. And so we really we didn't really want to take that away, but at the same time, we needed to improve the overall kind of usability. So what actually fell out of the approach was that we can still have breathing, and as you run, maybe after a long sprint, you can pull up your Mobiglas, and what you want to see is like, yeah, you want to be able to feel that your character is out of breath, even whether regardless of the context you're in. You still see the UI moving, but the cursor position is always going to be in the same place, regardless of the movement, even though we have the cursor is actually on the 2D plane in front of the Mobiglas technically. So it's much improved for sure. For a lot of the apps now, we've also done a massive push to unify the layout across the vehicle loadout, the player loadout in the Mobiglas. And we wanted to unify that kind of UI with the loadout UIs in Star Marine and Arena Commander. We're also going to reuse that for the shop item as well. So the shop item kiosk, essentially, we can really reuse the same system. So we really get a lot of return out of doing these efforts in terms of unifying the UI in both the code base as well as the layout. Because you also want to unify the layout because you establish user familiarity. So once a user is familiar with one thing, then across all of these other interfaces, they already know pretty much 90% how to actually interact with it, and they're, that's really a great thing for us, and in terms of development as well, because that means less work when we have a unified code base. We've always wanted to unify all these different UIs. So you'll notice before in 2.6, like in 3.0, we had this very specific Star Marine loadout screen that was different from the AC loadout. Basically, you had a very specific, here's your primary weapon, here's your secondary weapon. But as things expand, as we want to add more hardpoints, you want to be able to attach like a scope to your gun or different attachments to a particular item. We need to be able to scale that, and what we have right now, can accommodate any kind of additions and future features that we want to actually introduce.
So we already had the code base for the vehicle and personal managers. They were already using the same code base. All we're doing really is changing the 3D model. The way that we build players really is the same way we're building ships. It's a skeleton with hard points on it, item ports. And you put a piece of armor on that player, or you put a gun on that player, or you put a missile launcher on a ship. It's all the same hierarchy, essentially. We're just changing what's up front. Technically, to update Arena Commander, it already had the same code base. We just needed to put a new layer on top. But Star Marine required completely ripping out a whole old system. So it was this kind of rotten bit of wood, and everything else is working. So that was the biggest technical challenge, was to pull out the way that we set up our characters, because they were all having bespoke loadouts and systems that. So that needed redoing. It also meant that if we were switching over to a new system, we needed a way of tracking what I was using in Elimination versus what I'm using in Last Stand. When you're picking one team versus another, we needed a loadout system, which is something we hadn't had in the PMA currently. So that needed adding. So there was a couple of new systems that needed to go in. But that gives us a good groundwork now for what we plan to do with 3.2 moving forward and expanding loadouts in general, so you can save them in the future.
Bug fixing as well. So if there's something wrong in the base implementation somewhere, then we fix that, and that propagates to anywhere where we have that, where we use that code base. For testing, obviously, any change you make, we have to test across everywhere where that UI is used. So not so much for testing, but definitely for future development, we can just, hey, let's use this unified code base. We can use it for the character customizer. We can use it for shop item kiosk, because in the shop item kiosk, this is something that we're planning for the next release, is essentially being able to pick any port on your ship or hardpoint and see all the valid items that are available in that particular shop. So it's just filtered differently, but it's the same actual interface. So the other thing too is, we can also, doesn't necessarily have to be bound to, oh, you pick a hard point and then you see the items. We can also do the reverse, whereupon we see all the items and then we can see what valid hardpoints there are as well. So there's both option. We would want both options there because there's use cases for both.
So long term, this means in Star Marine you can save a elimination, a last stand for Marine, a last stand outlaw loadout. It means that we can prep the ground now for player created loadouts, not in Star Marine, but in the PU. So if the player's got their favorite exploration loadout, or they've got their favorite combat loadout, or they've got a favorite stealth loadout, they can set what they want, save it, and then when they move up to a locker or something, they can quickly switch their gear, and it'll remember, oh, you want this helmet and this undersuit, rather than having to manually go through each. So by the need that we had for Star Marine to have those fixed loadouts, it means we had to do the work up front to be able to save and then load back up loadouts. So moving forward, we should be able to start implementing player-created loadouts, and that's quite cool.
Beginning-wise, obviously they can be branded. We have a branding system, at least in the kiosk, like we actually have in the commodity kiosk, where right now it's just branded Port Olisar, and we actually have a different brand for Grimhex, where it's more like a DOS terminal. So it really kind of fits into the kind of the feeling and the environment much better. So when we have those different skins, obviously they're just different skins, but underneath it all, it's all the same.
In the short term, we're going to be hopefully seeing a lot more usable Mobiglas. It's full screen now. There's all the icons have been brought down to the bottom, so it should be a lot more readable, a lot more intuitive. Players should be able to quickly see where things are, what they can fit on things, and be able to read the text a lot clearer. So for 3.1, we wanted to make sure that it was better under the hood, but also a lot more convenient to use. So yeah, it was largely dealing with all the problems we either didn't get fixed for 3.0, or all the feedback that we got to address and say, like, let's make sure that this is great moving forward, because there's a lot of other apps, the map and mission manager and things like that we want to tackle that need bringing up to a better level. So this was kind of the first step at an iteration that, I mean, throughout Star Citizen we talk about, we put things out there, listen to the community, improve things. This is that in action, really. It's putting something out there in our first pass, getting that immediate feedback, but actually being able to then quickly turn around rather than waiting 3, 4, 5 months to be able to say, right, let's get on that immediately, because this is a barrier for people enjoying the game. So let's get that fixed.
So in terms of what's going into 3.1, so in terms of there's a lot of stuff UI-wise, but when we're talking about the Mobiglas, a new overhauled vehicle manager app, a new overhauled player loadout app is going in, as well as a new contracts manager as well. It's largely the same kind of functionality as you saw previously. It's just a much more streamlined user experience.
Yeah, for 3.1 we've been focusing on making it all usable. On the Star Marine and Arena Commander loadouts as well, we've been using the same system. They kind of separated. We had the one that was on Mobiglas. We had a bespoke system solely for Star Marine, and then we had the old system on Arena Commander. And what we wanted to do for 3.1 was bring those all under one roof, make sure it's a single code base. It all looks the same, so the player knows exactly where things live, and what they can do in one, they can do in the others. It meant that any bug fixings we do in the future, that's all taken care of immediately. So it makes moving forward a lot more streamlined, and Zane can then have a singular design vision. If we add one widget on one thing, it's everywhere. Bringing the Star Marine loadout and the AC loadout in line with the work we'll already be planning to do for Personal Manager app and the Vehicle Manager app, that was a kind of a big overhaul that really sets us up now moving forward. It's a game within a game, so a lot of the user interface kind of felt like it didn't need to be one and the same to what was in Star Citizen itself, but it meant that we had two ways of doing the same thing. So by and large, the end goal of kind of let's consolidate these needed doing sooner or later. But what we got in for 3.0, and it's been there for a while, I think since 2.6, brought in Star Marine updates. That user interface did exactly what we needed to do. But as we're looking to add more items that you can buy with Rec and improve the experience in Star Marine, that needed to grow. And the interface in Star Marine just wasn't able to add new items and things like that because it's all very handmade. So it needed updating. And as we were fixing bugs, we had a whole bunch of 3.0 bugs that needed to look at. It became very clear that we're fixing these bugs twice. There's a bug for this and a bug for that. And so it became very clear, like, instead of just doing all this, let's just do the work up front that we needed to do eventually anyway. Let's just get it done now, and then it's taken care of. So for Mobiglas on a larger scale, we want to look at the star map more. That's got a lot of work doing to kind of make it more usable, more readable, use the space that we now have. I think that was kind of constrained before, so we've got a lot more space now. So using the space better for the star map, so it's more intuitive, because I think that's going to be, once you've got your kit and you've got your ship, finding where to go is the next big thing. So we've got something that works, but making that better. We've also got things like the journal and other secondary apps that you're not going to be using all the time that we want to make sure work really well. So they'll be coming through down the line. And then in terms of the VMA and PMA, those apps, they've still got a whole bunch of stuff that needs to come in. We want to improve the stat readout. At the moment, there's just kind of basic information and basic size information, but there's a whole bunch of stats under the surface that aren't being read into the screen yet that we want to show. So you'll be able to compare this gun to that gun, that piece of armor to that piece of armor, so that when you're deciding, do I want a big heavy piece of equipment or a light piece of equipment, it's like, well, this protects from more damage, but it's going to slow me down, or it's going to take longer to aim or to move. And so players can make conscious decisions about when they find a derelict and they find a piece of equipment that's just floating in space, do I want to take this with me? They can compare stats immediately, which is also useful in the market. It's also useful when creating your favorite loadouts. So there's a whole bunch of additional features that we want. Now that we feel like it's a usable system and that flow has been sorted, layering in now personally created loadouts, stat comparison, new features that we think are going to enhance and make people use that more and get more value out of it.
So another thing that we have going into 3.1 is an overhauled Arena Commander and Star Marine loadout screen. So Star Marine is no longer a bespoke UI. It's using the same unified system that we set forth with the Personal Manager and Vehicle Manager and the Mobiglas. So those all have been unified. We have a character customizer UI, the first iteration of that, at least, going in to 3.1. Obviously, looking to expand into much more robust features later down the line, of course, as is with everything. New overhauled Mission Manager UI, largely the same functionality in terms of missions, but just streamline user experience and streamline user interface layout. In addition to that, service beacon functionality, so the ability to create service beacons and user-generated missions that you can accept, and you can view other players' missions. So there's a lot more player-generated kind of content there. Obviously, we want to, later down the line, introduce more filters, so you can have, I want missions just of this rating or more, or I want only contracts of this type. So we'll have all of that functionality to implement later down the line, but this is now kind of like our first iteration of that. So it's, as we get new features, they're really kind of rudimentary and basic, but they expand over time. Now, obviously, it's great to have the screen real estate to be able to expand into. So, another reason why we're happy about the foundation that we set with the new Mobiglas and layout. There are also some new improvements to the ship UI and HUD. So now we have much better feedback for the user in terms of where they're hitting their target ship or where they're getting hit. So it's more obvious. And we brought back some of the functionality that was missing from the visor, including like EM and IR signatures that you can now see. Later down the line, there's a whole lot of improvements that we want to make to the ship UI. It's definitely not in the final state that we see it. So we have improvements that we still need to make for that, and that we want to look to do for 3.2. So. But for now, one of the major improvements that we made was to how the ship model renders. So it's more efficient and kind of easier to see. So in Star Marine, the loadout presets were necessitated because you have different loadouts that you will need to use, whether depending on what side you're on. But base foundation of that is actually going to drive the idea of loadout presets, where you can save a particular configuration and just quickly change into that loadout, so you don't have to just do everything individually. So we'll have, you'll be able to set your own loadout presets, so it's much more easier to access what you like, and for different roles like stealth and so forth.
So making sure that it's not like a mobile phone where you've got 700 apps and it's like, where is the thing that I actually need to make sure it is? Because you don't want to be playing the game off your wrist. You want to be out there in the verse playing it properly. So striking the right balance between what's too much information, what's not enough information, and a lot of that's going to come from community feedback, listening to what the fans say. More of this, less of that. I find this quite hard. I'm having trouble with this. And that's worked really well from 3.0 into 3.1, keeping that going, keeping our ears open and listening to that feedback. As we're constantly keeping an eye on what the community says on Spectrum, on Reddit and other formats, we get a sense of what they want more of, what they want less of, and we can say, does this align with what we want? Does this make sense? Yeah, that would be a good use of Mobi. This wouldn't be a good use of Mobi. Even if people want the fastest point from A to B, and sometimes let me just buy my cargo from my Mobiglas. Because why do I have to get off my ship, go into the thing? But sometimes that's not what. No, because we want you to physically go there, because it's part of the experience of traveling. If you could do everything from your wrist, you'd never leave your cockpit. There's some things that don't suit Mobiglas, and there's some things that absolutely do, that there's no other way you could change what gloves you've got on other than physically, which would be horrible. So it's, what do we streamline, what don't we streamline? But yeah, listening to the community feedback, what do we feel like that's important? And also, do we hear this a lot, or do we hear it from one person? One person really wants a feature, like, okay, that sounds cool, but realistically, that's going to be 2 weeks worth of someone's work to get that in, versus 60, 70, 100 people have asked for this one thing. Okay, well, that's a big win for us, and it's something we want to do. It's something you desperately want. Let's put that into the game. It's finding the right time to put that in, obviously, but because we have kind of quarterly cycles, and it's something we're constantly looking at, we can just, okay, let's drop that in, let's drop that in. So we're looking at the mission manager on the side, whilst we're also looking at the VMA and PMA, because it's right there. It's like, oh, we just need to just change a bit of this flash, and then it's in. Great. It's a day's worth of work, and then we've improved that feature as well. So as work comes in, we can just keep evolving the design. So it's no longer a case of it's Mobiglas 2.0 or 3.0. It's the living Mobiglas.
So while we've made a lot of these improvements, and we were able to accomplish a lot in terms of improving the UI for 3.1, there's still a ton of stuff that we wanted to get in that we haven't yet. So we want to be able to view stats on the player, so and be able to compare items when you're actually using this loadout screen. So that's a whole another thing that we need to build in still, is the stat comparison. And if I equip this component to my ship, how's that going to affect my speed and my acceleration and so forth? So we don't necessarily have too much of that right now, but that's something that's definitely we're looking to going into the future, because it's pretty vital, especially in the loadout screen, and just general kind of effects as well. So we need to have a much more improved highlighting of the different items that you're focusing on the character. So that just comes with shader improvements, and yeah, just the general feeling of it is just going to be iterated over time. So I think we sort of lost the zooming and panning functionality, but we still, in this unification, some stuff sort of got lost as they're quite bespoke, but now we want to be able to obviously have that come back and have this nice feeling of the ship or the character, and you kind of zooming up to the port, and that kind of highlighting very nicely. That's something that obviously would be really nice to have, but wasn't necessarily critical for 3.1. But definitely going forward, we'll want to add in that polish for sure.